In the 1970s and 1980s, New Zealand had high levels of inflation, and to reduce this, they decided to target a 2% inflation rate. And it worked, they did reduce inflation over time. Slowly, other countries decided to adopt an inflation rate target, usually around 2%, and this included the US in 2012. So, why do countries target an inflation rate at all, and why is it 2%, not 0% or 6 or 7%? And in this video, that's what we're going to look to answer: why countries target an inflation rate and why some inflation is a good thing. Now, to start, we need to be clear, we're talking about some inflation. A 50% inflation rate is never a good thing. So when we say we want some inflation in the economy, we're talking about 2% or right around there. Now, we're also not going to discuss too much about what inflation is or how it occurs, things like that. We've done that in other videos. If you want to know more about that, go ahead and check those out. First, let's define inflation and deflation. Inflation is an increase in prices. Deflation is the opposite. It's a decrease in prices. And this is usually done by an increase or decrease in the money supply, usually when the Feds purchase or sell securities. Now, you don't need to know all of that. Just understand that an increase or decrease in the money supply affects prices. I think the best way to see why we want some inflation is to just look at deflation. Deflation occurs when times are bad and we have recessions and things like that. Like we said, prices decrease during deflation, and that's because the demand for goods decreases. During recessions, people are losing their jobs, their hours are being cut, their wages are decreasing. So they can't afford a lot of things, and the things that they do need to survive, they're buying fewer of those things as well. So deflation is just a bad thing in general, and we want to avoid that as much as possible. But we have a second problem as well. So during a deflationary period or during recessions, we need people to spend their money and go out and purchase things. But if people see that prices are decreasing and they continue to expect prices to decrease, why would somebody go out and purchase a new home or purchase a new car if they wait 6 or 12 months and the price is going to decrease during that time? So we start to see this downward spiral where decreasing prices make people expect prices to go down further, which slows down spending, which decreases prices more, and this cycle continues. And we have real-world examples of this. If we go back to 2008 during the financial crisis, the price of houses was decreasing. So if you were fortunate enough to be able to purchase a home during this time, it was better to wait 6 or 12 months because the price of whatever house you were looking at was most likely going to decrease. So people had no incentive to purchase a house right away. It was better to wait, which made the recession even worse. If we go back just a few years ago to that kind of post-pandemic housing market era, what you saw was a high demand for houses, which of course increased prices. But because the price of houses was increasing, it incentivized people to buy now, which increased the price of houses even more. And that's important to understand, as during high levels of inflation, people expect prices to continue to rise, so they're buying now, which makes inflation worse. And during deflationary periods, you see people waiting to purchase, which makes the deflationary period or the recession worse. So let's take a big picture of deflation here. With deflation, what you have is a decrease in demand, which decreases prices. So companies are either selling fewer of their product or they're selling them at a lower price, which means their revenue and their profit decreases. Well, if those decrease, they need to cut hours or wages, or they need to let people go. So people have less money either because they have fewer hours, less wages, or they don't have a job, which means that decreases demand even more. And because we see demand decreasing, people are holding off on spending, which decreases prices even more. And you can see how this spiral continues to go down. So deflation is a bad thing. We don't want that. We don't want people losing their jobs and losing hours and losing wages, things like that. So we really want to avoid deflation as much as possible. Okay, so enough doom and gloom here. How do we avoid deflation? Well, one way is to just have some inflation, and some is that 2% range. And that 2% range, what it does is it allows people and businesses to borrow and create new jobs and purchase things and increase wages and increase production, all of this stuff that's good for an economy. And what the Fed does when it targets that 2% inflation, and when people and businesses know that's what rate that they are targeting, people are able to make sound decisions which contribute to a well-functioning economy. Seriously, that's basically what's written on their website. And this is really interesting and kind of one of my favorite things about economics. Economics is a very logical, analytical, mathematical field. But what the Fed does is they tell people, hey, we're targeting a 2% rate. And it kind of flips everything on its head. And there's this kind of intermingling between economics and psychology where people hear this, they understand that, and they respond to this 2% inflation rate. If we think about what a healthy, stable economy looks like, what you have is you have an increase in production and you have job growth and wage growth, and people are able to borrow and save and invest more. And that's what that 2% targeted inflation is trying to do, is create that type of economy. We've seen in other videos that inflation increases, but wages usually either stay at the same rate or sometimes they even go higher. So people are getting paid more, which is a good thing, and that's what that 2% helps do. You also see that debt gets cheaper because your wages are increasing, and if you have, say, $10,000 on a car loan, well, now you have more money to put towards that car loan. So you now have cheaper debt. So that's really what that 2% is trying to target. And that's a good thing. We want people to have higher wages and we want higher production. It keeps the economy rolling. And that's what we're trying to do with that 2% inflation rate. So there's one more topic to discuss, and this is probably the most challenging, but it's also probably the most important. And that's the Federal Reserve's ability to adjust the interest rate. And they can do this during, say, inflationary periods or deflationary periods to adjust it and kind of bring it back to that 2% level. And we've actually seen this over the past few years. You've seen high levels of inflation, and we've seen the Federal Reserve increase the interest rates over the past few years. But we have one problem, is we can only go down to that 0% level. Technically you can go negative, but that rarely happens. But once you get to that 0% level, it's what we call a zero lower bound problem. So what we see is we see in deflationary periods, we decrease the interest rate, which increases borrowing and increases spending and helps stimulate the economy. But if you're at that zero level, that 0% level, you can't go down any further. So you can't counter that deflationary period or the deflation you're experiencing. So the Feds have a problem. They can't use one of the most important tools that they have. So what we see with this 2% inflation rate that we've been talking about the entire video is that 2% inflation rate increases the interest rate enough that if we do see a deflationary period, we can adjust down to that zero lower bound or at least close to it and hopefully help stimulate the economy. We've gone over a lot in this video, and hopefully you better understand why some inflation is a good thing. And if you did pick something up, make sure to like and subscribe, and check out the other videos on inflation to better understand it. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next video.